Welcome to Part 5, Chapters 9 through 10, and the conclusion of Envirian, a fable for conservatives the world over, by Joanna Piccioni Hurley. Copyright 2016. This video will be about 30 minutes long. Chapter 9, The Election. November and the day of the election arrived. The sun was shining, causing Lake Mary May to sparkle as puffy white clouds floated through the azure sky on a light breeze. It seemed that even God in His wisdom was making it easy for reluctant conservative voters to get out of bed and go to their polling places to vote for Bump. Early that morning, Rodeo and True made a big show of going to vote for Bump. They hoped this show of solidarity would encourage their former supporters to cast their votes for Bump rather than stay home. At the end of the day, as the polling places in each county began turning in their final vote count, 4 auditors at Envirian City Hall accepted the vote tallies and added them to the total count. 2 auditors were conservative and the other 2 were liberal environmentalists, just to make sure all was done fairly and honestly. Envirian City had 8 polling places, it being such a large city and all. At first, 2 city polls were turned in, which put Mienten in the lead. Then 2 of Bump's counties in the south were counted next, and Bump gained a slight edge over Mienten. As votes from both the country counties and city polling places were counted, the lead shifted ever so slightly back and forth from Bump to Mienten and then Mienten back to Bump. Finally, when the last city polling place was counted, and with only one distant northern county left to turn in their votes, Mienten had a small lead. Bump knew at this point that if not for this stay-at-home movement, he would by now have a substantial lead over Mienten. He could only put his hopes now in this distant northern county. It was one of True's counties, consisting mostly of farmers and rather thinly populated. If they had a good turnout, Bump could still win. But if there were too many stay-at-homers, the conservative cause would be lost. Both True and Rodeo, with their wives, had traveled from their home counties after they had voted to be with Bump and the Conservative Party leaders at this crucial moment in their nation's history. Bump, his wife, and his children and grandchildren sat at a long table in Farmer's Pub, a family pub frequented by conservatives and by country folk visiting the city. The pub was right next door to Envirian City Hall. Conservative Party elites stopped by Bump's table to congratulate him on his outstanding campaign and to wish him blessings and good luck. As Bump's sons and daughters made small talk with their beloved father to ease the thick tension of that momentous night, 2 Conservative Party leaders entered the pub. All heads turned in their direction. The 2 men smiled when they spotted Bump's party seated in a cozy corner near the fireplace. But as they approached the table, Bump could see their smiles relax considerably. His heart sank. They said they were so sorry, that Bump had run a strong campaign. In the end, True and Rodeo had given Bump their support. But the final tally of all the votes had given Mienten a slight lead over Bump. She had won by only 27 votes. Opal Imalia Mienten was the new president mayor of Envirian Nation. Bump was stunned. He sat there motionless, and for the first time in his life speechless. He could hardly believe it. He was so used to winning. How could he have lost so crucial an election when he had put his all into it, when he had given it everything? True, standing nearby, didn't know what to say. At this point, it all seemed surreal to him, as though all that was familiar in the real world had fallen into the abyss, and a strange, very foreign world was taking its place. It was Rodeo who spoke. "Tommy, I am truly sorry to hear this. You know, history will say that Mienten won this election, but we will surely know that it was the stay-at-home voters who won. Their win will forever be seen by the world as the height of arrogance. The stay-at-home voters allowed their pride to run roughshod over their principles. They put their pride above their own children's futures. The joy, the beauty, and the abundance that was once found on Envirian Island will soon be no more. The heavy arm of oppression will take their place. It will not happen all at once, but slowly it will creep into the people's lives. With stealth, oppression will rule harshly over Envirian. The country folk will feel it first. They will watch their crops fail and their cattle starve as Mienten's new environmental laws are instituted. When they are denied any use of the bug powder, the infestation will have nothing to stop it. Many farming and ranching families will leave the island for good, their hamlets deserted and their homes lying empty and abandoned. Then Envirian City will begin to know deprivation also, when the price of imported food burdens their already strained budgets, strained because they no longer get the many orders from the country folk for tackle or leather goods, for clothing or household goods. Their iron workers, saddle makers, and shoemakers, and china producers, restaurants, and pubs will feel a slowdown in demand for their products and services. A great pall will descend over this city, and the poorest and weakest among them will suffer the most. Those poor city folk may never know that it was their votes for Mienten that caused their suffering, because Mienten will do what she does best. She will lie. She will find a way to blame the farmers and ranchers for deserting their island. She will blame the bugs and the weather. She may even blame God, but she will never blame herself or Blyton or any of the Environmentalist Party leaders for their oppressive and unnecessary laws and regulations. The laws they will pass will be the real cause for the destruction of the freest, strongest, most productive, and happiest island nation that the world ever knew. And there we have beautiful but very sad Envirian Island. Chapter 10. The Exodus, Answered Prayers, and the Reunion. Within a year of the election, Mienten and the Environmentalist Party passed all of the oppressive and unnecessary laws that Rodeo had predicted. Worst of all, the use of both the orange and yellow bug powder was banned by law. As Rodeo had predicted, the bug infestation reached a peak within 5 years. The last year, drought worsened the mite problem even further. As crops were destroyed, many farmers and eventually some ranchers left the island in hopes of a better, freer life on the continent. The wealthier country folk like Bump, True, and Rodeo, and others were able to ride out the lean years when no profits could be made. They watched with sickened hearts as deterioration descended on the countryside. Good farmland turned wild again as the plows, rusting and still, sat idly in the fields. The pictures show a rusting plow and a mite-destroyed wheat crop. Eventually, they heard about riots in the city and a militaristic police force that suppressed those riots with brutality and great power. Some city folk, humbled after losing their jobs, even came to the country to get away from the riots and inhabited the broken down and deserted farms and ranch homes. To assist the poor and ameliorate the cause of the riots, programs were instituted by the city council legislature. At Mienten's urging, burdensome taxes were passed to pay for those programs. The heavy taxes, which squeezed out profits even further, caused more businesses to fail. Thus more jobs were lost, and the numbers of dependents on government programs to feed and house the jobless increased dramatically. At the same time, corruption in government lined the pockets of the liberal Environmentalist Party leaders, and Mienten, Mieten, and others became very wealthy. The ruling class grew and flourished, while the country class diminished in wealth, always a bad sign. But the light had not completely gone out on Envirian Island, because there was still a God in heaven who heard the prayers of the now humbled people of Envirian. For an amazing thing happened 5 years after that historic election, when at the peak of the bug infestation, flocks of tiny white-throated gray birds invaded the island. They had long, slender beaks and green flecks in their feathers, and they liked to eat mites. They feasted on the bugs until there were hardly any left. Some birds were even seen vomiting out the bugs they had eaten and going back to eat more. Then, the following spring, those birds remembered that feast, and twice a year the island became a stopover destination for them as they migrated to and from the continent each spring and autumn. Those birds were God's answer to the prayers of the humble countryfolk who had remained on the island, including the prayers of Bump, True, and Rodeo. A light had begun to shine again over the countryside of Envirian Island. 1 year before that, in 1837, Bill Basic beat Mienten in the president-mayor election. Through Basic's ability to negotiate with others, he eventually persuaded the Environmentalist Party that a more moderate approach to this bug problem was in order. Thus, 1 year after the tiny white-throated gray birds came, the environmentalists did not fight the city council legislature when it passed laws that allowed for use of both the yellow and orange bug powders, as long as their use was beyond 8 miles from the city. As well, the other regulations were considerably lightened, and the expensive license to purchase or use bug powder was completely abolished. Some farmers and ranchers returned to the island, but many of their grown children were well established on the continent and did not return. This separation was a source of grief for them all. 8 years after that historic 1833 election, Bump, True, and Rodeo had long forgotten their election rivalries. They decided one spring day, as they sat in Bump's home drinking lemonade, to send word out to their old friends on the continent that a reunion party would be held on the 4th day of July that year. Then word was spread all over the island that Bump, True, and Rodeo were having a party for conservatives. Plans were made, decorations were purchased, and Bump's large mansion near the seaside was decked out and prepared for the party. The day of the reunion party was sunny and breezy. A band began to play music on the lawn. As their old friends arrived, Bump felt the joy of the old days fill his heart. True and Rodeo greeted friends they had not seen in years, and there was much laughter, dancing, eating, and reveling. Farmer ranchers and farmers told the stories of their new lives on the continent to their old friends on the island. Tears were shed by some of the more tender-hearted wives for the losses they had endured, but only for a moment, for their joy at being together far outweighed their sorrow. Finally, Bump, True, and Rodeo stood before their esteemed crowd of old friends. True began to speak first. He remembered with them the old days when their historic election took place. He chastened his friends and farmer supporters who had sworn they would never give their vote to Bump or Rodeo. He revealed to them the arrogance of the stay-at-home movement, and he gently reminded them of the suffering, loss, and devastation their pride had cost their farms, their ranches, and their families. Then True said, "Neighbors, friends, farmers, and ranchers, consider this. When you chose not to vote for Tommy Bump, were you defending yourselves and your families? Did you fight for the freedoms and rights our first fathers had worked so hard to create for us, sacrificing even their very lives? Were you willing to sacrifice even the minor particulars you wanted for the greater goal, our liberty? The answer to these questions is no. Never again, my friends, never again. Defend yourselves. Fight for your families. Defend your farms, your ranches, and most of all, defend your country, Envirian, that symbol of liberty that you loved all your life. Remember the words written by the first fathers of Envirian on the great stone of Christaron. You are made free by your constitution. Therefore defend it, for therein are your rights upheld. In the future you must vote, my friends. At every chance, at every opportunity, vote. Vote for the best man or woman that each election gives to you. He will not be a perfect man. No one is. But choose the best man or woman in each election, the one who will fight for our liberty and defend our Constitution above all. In the back of the crowd, a man started clapping. Then others began clapping until finally everyone was clapping and shouting praise for Gertrude's eloquent speech. Then Smarto Rodeo stood before the crowd and spoke. He recounted the laws that the Environmentalist Party had passed, and how not only the country folk suffered, but the city folk as well, especially the poor. He, too, did not entirely blame the liberals for the suffering. He blamed the stay-at-home movement. He blamed his most loyal supporters, who could not bring themselves to cast a vote for Bump. But he spoke gently, kindly, and with great love in his heart for his friends. Then Rodeo said, "As True has just so eloquently told us, there is still a wonderful future ahead of us if we learn from this hard lesson. When we vote, we must vote for the best man or woman, who may not be perfect, but we will always be safe if we never again throw away our votes. For did not the stone of Christaron warn us to be not idle and choose liberty?" Let me repeat that. Be not idle and choose liberty. We choose by voting. Let's trust in God and remember the biblical scripture wherein the prophet says, "In your hands, Lord, is power and might to make great the nations." May God make great our people. May God strengthen the conservative movement. May God strengthen this great nation. My heart is with you, my friends. Remember, we must never again stay home. The crowd applauded Rodeo, and he placed his hand on his heart and flashed his terrific smile. Finally, Bump stepped up to speak to the crowd, and here is what he said. "Friends, I'm so grateful to see all of you here enjoying this beautiful day in our home. It's good to see that you all have survived the onslaught of our problems that began when that voracious bug arrived on our beautiful island 10 years ago. It warms my heart to see the smiles on your faces. I know that many of you miss our island paradise of the past. You miss the old days when all was simpler. But I hope you have noticed that this island nation has been experiencing a renewal in the last 3 years. Some of you have returned and begun farming and ranching again, even though your farms and ranches are smaller than they once were and your wealth diminished. Yes, our wealth was sapped by those oppressive laws and regulations. But we voted in Bill Basic as President Mayor a few years ago, and he has negotiated the rollback of many of those laws. We can bring back our wealth, jobs, and a good economy again if we all continue to vote for smart, conservative leaders." He paused, then with a choke in his voice, he said, "I want you to know that the love in my heart for you is overwhelming me right now. Whether you voted for me or stayed at home the day of that historic election, it doesn't matter to me now in the least. We have all learned a valuable, though hard lesson, which that election taught us. We have learned that the most precious thing we own is our right to vote, and that our votes have more power to protect our liberty than anything else. But I must tell you, there are things I would have changed then if I had known what would happen. For one, once the council banned the free orange bug powder, I ought to have reserved a free spot under the Bluebell Hills where anyone could come and dig and bag the yellow powder for free. Yes, the land under the Bluebell Hills is my property, but the real owner of my land is God. There were still plenty of large farms that preferred to pay rather than do the digging and bagging work themselves. I will tell you, I truly understand the resentment true supporters felt in those days. Friends, let's put the past and all our mistakes behind us this very day. Let's renew our friendships with greater love and affection than before. And let's use these hard lessons, which have humbled us all, to become better men and women, less quick to judge, less prone to pride, and more open to the good that can so easily be found in all of us. Just vote and watch as we make Envirian strong again, rich again. Don't let fear or distrust disable you. Just vote. We're going to make Envirian great again. Friends, my heart is filled with love for every one of you. Then, with a tear in his eye, Bump stopped speaking. The large crowd of friends on the lawn, some former true supporters, some rodeos people, and some friends of Bump, all in unison let out a roar of approbation. Many had a tear or two in the corners of their eyes as well, especially the tender-hearted women. But all had nothing but love in their hearts that day, in that moment in time, not only for their leader True, their leader Rodeo, or their leader Bump, but instead for all three of them. They knew in that moment that any one of those three good men would have made the difference had he won the general election and then repealed those harsh laws and regulations. Then all their sorrows and losses would have been avoided. Never again would they let pride, resentment, and insignificant differences close their hearts to the goodness in their conservative leaders and in each other. Now one more job lay ahead of them. They must teach the story of Envirian Island to their children, so that their children would not suffer as they had by making the same mistakes. Their love for their children, for Envirian, and for their God gave their lives meaning as they experienced this wonderful renewal in their beloved Envirian Island, where egalitarianism, liberty, and individualism had once reigned and would reign again if they had any say in the matter, or should I say any vote in the matter. For what, my dear friends, is the significance of one small vote? It is like a bright white flame, a flame that feeds the fires of liberty, and millions of these little flames create the brilliant light in which liberty thrives and survives. God bless liberty. God bless us all. Old Envirian text carved into the great stone of Christuron. Remember, O man, you are made free by your God, the Holy One. See to it that your law also maketh you free. Be ye free from unrighteous laws and oppression. Yet if unrighteousness be your governor, your people shall greatly sorrow. Oppressive laws shall enslave you, your burdens shall be heavy, and mourning shall follow after you in your generations. O man, was it not liberty that did bind your hearts to this land? Was it not the freedoms you enjoyed that first captured your hearts and made you love your country? Therefore, choose leaders who uphold righteous laws and hold a place in their hearts to honor your Constitution. Know ye not, O man, that your God did inspire good men to write your Constitution? Yea, and more, you are made free by your Constitution. Therefore defend it, for therein are your rights upheld. For this reason your God hath given the Constitution to you through inspiration to establish your freedom, and to limit the power that government can hold over you. Therefore go to it. Choose liberty, choose honesty and righteousness. Fail not to uphold that which your God hath so graciously given you. O man, remember, that law which is constitutional cometh from your God. Any law that is against it is come from unrighteousness. Be ye warned this day. Be not idle, and choose liberty. The end. I hope you enjoyed my story, Envirian, a Fable for Conservatives the World Over. On YouTube, please look for Envirian, a Fable for Conservatives Part 6 to learn more from my questions for review, references, acknowledgments, and a little joke about Boudreaux and Thibodeau in 2016. These are helpful to reading groups and conservative educational institutions. You may contact Joanna at joannaforfreedom@gmail.com. Thank you so very much for listening. Signing out, Joanna Piccioni Hurley.